Let me say something most people won't dare admit: intelligence alone makes you easy to ignore. Right now, somewhere in your life, someone less capable than you is quietly moving ahead, getting chosen, getting heard, getting influence. And it's not because they're smarter, it's because they understand something you don't. And here's the uncomfortable question: if you're truly as intelligent as you believe, why aren't you the one in control? Pause on that. Because the answer isn't flattering. You've been playing a game that doesn't reward intelligence, it exploits it. You explain too much. You reveal too quickly. You think clarity earns respect. But in reality, it makes you predictable. While you're talking, proving, justifying, someone else is doing something far more dangerous. They're watching you. They're mapping how you think, where you hesitate, what triggers you. And when the moment comes, they don't outsmart you, they outplay you. That's the part nobody tells you. Influence doesn't come from being right. It comes from being unreadable. Centuries ago, long before modern psychology gave it fancy names, one brutal insight emerged. The world doesn't reward the most intelligent mind. It rewards the most strategic one. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how that shift happens. 7 dark lessons, uncomfortable, unspoken, but incredibly effective, that turn raw intelligence into real influence. Not polite advice, not feel-good principles. This is the side of human nature most people sense, but refuse to face. So if you've ever felt overlooked, if you've ever watched less capable people rise while you stayed stuck explaining yourself, this will change how you move. Because by the end of this video, you'll understand one thing very clearly: it's not about thinking better. It's about playing smarter. Let's begin. Number 1. Here's where most men quietly lose the game, not because they're weak, but because they don't realize they're leaking power every time they open their mouth. You think explaining yourself makes you respected. It doesn't. It makes you readable. And a man who can be read can be handled. I learned this the hard way. There was a moment, years ago, sitting across from a guy in a meeting. I had better ideas, sharper thinking. I could dismantle every argument he made. And I did. I spoke more, explained more, clarified every angle. I walked out thinking I dominated. A week later, he got the deal, not me. That's when it hits you. This isn't about being right, it's about control. Because while I was busy proving my intelligence, he was studying me. Quiet, patient, watching how I reacted when challenged, where I got defensive, when I rushed to justify myself. By the time I finished speaking, he didn't just hear my ideas, he understood my psychology. And that's the part no one warns you about. Every explanation is a confession. You're telling people what matters to you, what shakes you, where your limits are. You're handing them the blueprint to influence you. And once someone has that, they don't need to beat you. They just need to position themselves correctly. Watch any room carefully. The loudest man feels powerful, but he's usually the easiest to control. He's broadcasting everything. The quiet one, though, the one who barely speaks, who leans back, who lets silence stretch just a little longer than is comfortable, that's the one everyone subconsciously adjusts to. Because silence creates tension, and tension creates authority. There's always that moment in a conversation where someone asks you, "Why did you do that?" And most men rush in, almost instinctively, to explain, to justify, to be understood. That instinct is exactly what weakens you, because the more you explain, the more angles you expose, and once people see the angles, they start testing them. But when you don't fully answer, when you give just enough, then stop, something shifts. You'll see it in their face. A slight pause, a recalculation. Now they're the ones trying to figure you out. Now they're adjusting to you. That's control. Most men enter rooms trying to be seen, trying to be validated, trying to prove they belong. But the man who actually holds power walks in with a different objective. He's there to read the room, not impress it. He notices who talks over who seeks approval, who mirrors behavior, who forces laughter. He's not participating yet, he's mapping. And once you see the patterns, everything becomes predictable. The confident one who talks too much, insecure. The agreeable one, easy to sway. The aggressive one, emotional, reactive, controllable. You stop arguing because you don't need to. You stop proving because you already know where everyone stands. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The less people understand you, the less they can control you. Mystery isn't accidental. It's constructed. So you start moving differently. You answer questions without revealing intent. You speak without exposing your position. You listen more than you react. And over time, something changes. People hesitate before challenging you. Not because you said anything threatening, but because they don't have enough information to predict your response. And unpredictability, that's where power lives. You don't need to dominate conversations. You need to control the frame. And the man who controls the frame is rarely the one talking. He's the one watching. Number 2. There's a moment most men fail to control, and it costs them more than they realize. Not in some dramatic, obvious way, but quietly in how people start to read them, test them, and eventually handle them. It usually starts small, a comment that feels slightly off, a tone that carries disrespect, a message that hits just enough to trigger something in you. And before you even think, you react. You fire back, you defend, you correct, you make sure they know you're not the one to be played with. In your head, that feels like strength, like dominance. But look closer, it's exposure. Because the moment you react instantly, you've just shown your timing, your triggers, your pressure points. You've told them exactly how to move you. And once someone knows how to move you, they don't need to overpower you. They just need to press the right button. I've seen this play out in ways that are almost embarrassing when you notice it. A guy gets a slightly disrespectful message from a colleague, nothing extreme, just enough to poke at his ego. Within minutes, he's typing paragraphs, over-explaining, defending his position, trying to regain control. Meanwhile, the other guy, silent, watching, letting him unravel. By the time a response comes back, it's short, controlled, almost indifferent, and just like that, the frame is set. One is reacting, the other is directing. And here's the part that stings. The one who reacted thinks he stood his ground. In reality, he handed it over. Most men are addicted to immediate reactions. They think speed equals strength, that if you don't respond right away, you look weak. But it's the opposite. Immediate reaction is emotional, and emotion, when it's visible, is leverage, just not yours. The man who understands power does something different. He feels the same impulse, the same irritation, the same urge to respond, but he doesn't move. He lets it sit. He lets the silence stretch. Not because he's passive, but because he's calculating. That gap, that small delay between stimulus and response, that's where control is built, and it does something subtle but powerful to the other person. Because when you don't react the way they expect, their certainty breaks. They start questioning themselves. Was that too much? Did I misread him? Why isn't he responding? Is he ignoring me or planning something? Now they're the ones off balance. There was a situation once where a man was publicly challenged in a group setting, slight jab, disguised as humor. Everyone looked at him, waiting for the reaction. That's the trap. The social pressure to respond instantly, to defend your status in real time. Instead, he just looked. Slight nod, no words, no tension. Conversation moved on. Hours later, in private, he addressed it calmly, directly, with full control of the frame. No audience, no pressure, no emotion. The result, complete respect. Not because he fought back, but because he chose when to engage. Timing is dominance. You don't win by reacting faster. You win by reacting on your terms. And once you internalize this, your behavior shifts in a way people can't quite explain, but they feel it. You stop being easy to provoke. You stop being predictable. Your silence starts carrying weight. Your responses become sharper, cleaner, more intentional. And people notice. Not always consciously, but they adjust. They hesitate before pushing you. They measure their words more carefully, because they don't know what triggers you anymore, and that uncertainty puts you in control. The truth most men avoid is this: if someone can make you react on command, you're not in control. You're being controlled. So you slow down, you let things breathe, you choose your moment. Because power isn't in the reaction. It's in the delay. Number 3. Most men think power comes from what you say. But if you pay attention, the ones who actually move things rarely talk much. They listen. Not in a polite, passive way, in a calculated, almost predatory way. Because here's the truth nobody spells out. People are desperate to reveal themselves, constantly. They just disguise it as conversation. Sit with someone for 10 minutes and watch what happens. Give them space, nod at the right moments, ask 1 or 2 simple questions, and they'll start handing you everything. Their frustrations, their ambitions, their insecurities, the things they pretend not to care about but clearly do. You don't have to dig. You don't have to force it. Just stay quiet long enough, and they fill the silence. And that's where most men fail. They don't listen, they wait. Waiting is just reloading your own thoughts while the other person is talking. You're not absorbing anything, you're just preparing your turn. Strategic listening is different. It's focused, intentional. You're not hearing words, you're reading patterns. I remember a conversation with a guy who kept talking about loyalty, over and over, bringing it up in different ways, different stories. On the surface, it sounded like a value, but if you watched closely, it wasn't strength, it was fear. Fear of betrayal, fear of being left behind. That one detail told me more about how to deal with him than anything he said directly. That's how this works. People tell you who they are, but rarely in a straight line. You watch what triggers them, what they avoid, where their energy shifts. The moment their tone changes when a certain topic comes up, that's not random. The slight hesitation before answering something simple, that's not nothing. The way someone laughs a bit too loud when they're uncomfortable, that's not confidence. That's data. And once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. The man who talks too much gives away his position. The man who listens builds a map. And once you have that map, you don't need to force anything. You just move accordingly. There was a situation where 2 men were negotiating. One kept talking, trying to justify his price, explaining why it made sense, stacking logic on top of logic. The other barely spoke. Just a few questions, spaced out, calm, almost detached. By the end, the one who talked less got exactly what he wanted, not because he argued better, but because he understood what the other man needed to feel in order to agree. That's influence. And it doesn't look like control. It feels like alignment, but it's not accidental. When you listen properly, you stop making the mistake most men make, treating everyone the same. You realize quickly that different people are driven by different things. Some want recognition, some want security, some want to feel superior, some are just trying to hide how insecure they actually are. And once you see that, your approach changes. You don't challenge a man who's afraid of looking weak. You give him a way to feel strong while still guiding him. You don't confront someone who needs validation. You feed it just enough to gain leverage. You don't outsmart someone insecure about intelligence. You let them believe they arrived at the conclusion. None of this is random. It's precise. And here's the uncomfortable part. The better you get at listening, the less you feel the need to speak. Because you realize most conversations aren't exchanges, they're exposures. So you slow down. You ask fewer, better questions. You let people talk past the point they intended. And they will, every time. And when you finally speak, it lands differently. Because now you're not guessing, you're targeting. Number 4. There's a type of man you've met before, and something about him unsettled you, even if you couldn't explain why. He's not loud, not aggressive, not trying to dominate the room, but there's a distance around him, subtle, controlled, almost invisible, like there's a line you instinctively know not to cross. That's not personality. That's design. Most men think boundaries are verbal. They think it's about saying things like, "Don't disrespect me," or "I don't tolerate that." But that's surface level, and honestly, it's weak. Because if you have to announce your boundaries, it usually means they're already being tested. Real boundaries aren't spoken. They're felt. And you feel them in men who don't get pulled into things they don't need. No unnecessary reactions, no emotional entanglement, no urgency to fix, defend, or absorb what isn't theirs. They're present, but untouched. Most men, though, are the opposite. They walk into conversations like open systems, absorbing everything. Someone is stressed, they take it on. Someone is angry, they mirror it. Someone complains, they get dragged into it, and they don't even realize what's happening. They think they're being empathetic, being supportive. But what they're actually doing is becoming controllable. Because the moment your emotional state can be influenced by someone else, you're no longer operating on your own terms. I've seen this play out in relationships more times than I can count. A man sits across from a woman who's upset, venting, emotional, chaotic. She's not just expressing, she's testing whether consciously or not. Watching if he'll match her energy, if he'll get reactive, if he'll lose composure. And most men fail right there. They lean in too much, start agreeing, amplifying, trying to fix everything, trying to prove they care. But what she actually registers is instability. Now compare that to the man who listens, calm, grounded, almost unaffected. He acknowledges, but doesn't absorb. I hear you. That sounds frustrating. So what are you going to do about it? No rush, no emotional spike, no loss of control. And suddenly the dynamic shifts. She adjusts. The energy stabilizes around him. That's not detachment. That's dominance. And it works the same in every environment. Work, friendships, social circles. The man who can't be pulled into emotional chaos becomes the reference point others orient around. Not because he demands it, but because he embodies control. There was a moment in a group setting where tension started building, voices rising, subtle competition, egos clashing. You could feel it in the room. Most people got caught in it, picking sides, reacting, feeding the atmosphere. One man didn't. He stayed exactly the same. Same tone, same posture, same pace. He didn't withdraw. But he didn't engage emotionally either. And slowly, almost without anyone noticing, the room calibrated back down to his level. That's influence without effort. Because when you don't move, others have to. And here's the uncomfortable truth most men avoid. If someone can shift your emotional state, they have access to you. And access is power. Not yours, theirs. So you start closing those gaps. You stop reacting to every emotional signal. You stop taking responsibility for feelings that aren't yours. You listen, but you don't carry. You engage, but you don't attach. And over time, something changes. People feel it before they understand it. They realize they can't guilt you, can't pull you into drama, can't shake your center, and that forces a different kind of respect, quieter, but far more real. Because stability is rare, and a man who remains steady while everything around him shifts becomes the one everything else revolves around. Number 5. Nearly every man exposes their standards the same way they expose their weaknesses, by talking about them. They think saying, "I don't tolerate disrespect," makes them look strong, like they've drawn a line. But if you pay attention, the men who say that the most are usually the ones getting disrespected the most. Because words don't set standards, consequences do. There was a guy I knew who used to repeat the same lines over and over. "I value loyalty. I don't deal with fake people. I expect respect." He said it so often it almost sounded like a mantra. But in reality, it was a warning sign. Because every time someone crossed him, he stayed. He explained, he forgave. He gave second chances, third chances, endless chances. And people noticed. Not consciously at first, but they felt it. This man has no real edge. He talks, but he doesn't act. And once people sense that, the game changes. They start testing you in small ways. Showing up late, speaking over you, canceling plans last minute, pushing boundaries just enough to see what happens. And if nothing happens, if all they get is another explanation, another conversation, another warning, they go further. Not because they hate you, because they can. That's the brutal part most men don't want to accept. People don't respect what you say you are. They respect what you enforce. The man who actually holds power doesn't announce anything. He doesn't need to. You feel it in how quickly he adjusts when something is off. No speech, no emotional reaction, just a shift. Access changes. Energy changes. Availability disappears. And it's subtle at first, almost invisible. Someone disrespects him, he doesn't argue, doesn't correct, doesn't try to teach them how to treat him. He just withdraws slightly. Less attention, less presence, less engagement, and the other person feels it before they understand it. Something is different. Something they had is no longer there. That's when respect begins. Because now it's not about what you said, it's about what they lost. I've seen this play out in situations where one man gets walked over constantly, always explaining himself, always trying to fix the dynamic with words. And another man, in the same environment, rarely speaks about standards at all, but the moment something crosses a line, he adjusts instantly. No noise, no drama, just distance. And people treat them completely differently. Not because one is louder, but because one is real. The truth is, announcing your standards gives people a script. You're telling them exactly how to get back into your good graces. I know you value honesty, so I'm being honest now. I know respect matters to you, so let me explain. They mirror your words back to you, and you let them in again. You think they've changed. They haven't. They've just learned the language. But when your standards are silent, there's no script to follow. No clear rulebook. Just a pattern they start to notice. When I act like this, he pulls away. When I do this, access disappears. And that uncertainty forces adaptation. Because now they don't know how far they can push you, and that's exactly where you want them. Real boundaries don't control other people. They control you. Your time, your attention, your presence. You're not trying to make anyone behave differently. You're deciding what you engage with and what you don't. And once you start operating like that, something shifts internally too. You stop feeling the need to explain yourself. You stop negotiating your own value. You stop trying to convince people to treat you right. You simply remove yourself when they don't. No anger, no speeches, no second chances dressed as understanding. Just adjustment. And over time, people either rise to meet that standard or they disappear. Either way, you win. Because a man who doesn't enforce his standards is controlled by whoever ignores them. And a man who enforces them silently becomes someone people think twice about testing. Number 6. A lot of men are terrified of disappearing, because deep down, they believe if they're not constantly present, they'll be forgotten. So they stay available, always replying, always showing up, always within reach, thinking that proximity creates value. It doesn't, it erodes it. Familiarity, without scarcity, turns you into background noise. You stop being chosen and start being expected. And the moment you're expected, you're no longer respected. Think about it honestly. There's always that one guy who replies instantly, who never misses a call, who's always down, always around, always accessible. On paper, he looks solid, reliable, but in reality, no one values him. Not because he's a bad person, but because there's no cost to accessing him. He's predictable, guaranteed, safe, in the worst way. Now contrast that with the man who isn't always there. Not absent, not distant in a weak sense, but selective. You don't always know when he'll respond. You don't always know if he'll show up, but when he does, it lands. People pay attention. His presence has weight. That's not luck. That's scarcity. I remember watching this shift happen with someone who used to be everywhere, every event, every conversation, every message answered within minutes. He was liked, sure, but ignored when it mattered. Then something changed. He pulled back. Not dramatically, just enough. Replies slowed down. Appearances became selective. Conversations became shorter, sharper. At first, people joked about it. Where have you been? You disappeared. But underneath that, there was curiosity. Then something else started happening. The same people who barely noticed him before began reaching out more, inviting him more, paying attention when he spoke. Nothing about him changed, except access. And that's when it becomes clear, attention is a currency, and most men spend it like it's worthless. You reply instantly because you don't want to seem rude. You show up because you don't want to miss out. You stay available because you don't want to lose connection. But all you're doing is flooding the market with your presence, and anything abundant loses value. There's a quiet power in not being immediately reachable, in letting messages sit, in choosing when to engage instead of reacting on demand. Because the moment people realize they can't have instant access to you, they start valuing the moments they do. And it goes deeper than that. It shifts the internal dynamic too. You stop living reactively. You stop organizing your time around other people's urgency. You start operating on your own timeline. And that's where control returns. This isn't about playing games or pretending to be busy. People can feel fake scarcity instantly. This is about actually having priorities that don't revolve around constant availability. Your time, your focus, your energy, they're not open access anymore. And when that shift happens, people feel it without you saying a word. There was a moment in a social circle where one man stopped attending everything. No announcement, no explanation. He just became selective. When he did show up, conversations gravitated toward him. Not because he tried, but because he wasn't always there. Absence created gravity. And that's the paradox most men never understand. Being less available doesn't make you lose relevance. It creates it. Because the human mind is wired to chase what isn't guaranteed. What's always there becomes invisible. What's uncertain becomes valuable. So you start moving differently. You don't answer every message immediately. You don't say yes to every invitation. You don't make yourself constantly accessible just to maintain connections. You choose. And that choice, that restraint, builds presence in a way constant visibility never will. Because a man who is always available is easy to replace. But a man who knows when to disappear is hard to forget. Number 7. Most men confuse kindness with submission, and they don't realize they're being trained by the very people they're trying to impress. They think being a good man means always being available, always saying yes, always showing up, always giving, and then they sit there, confused, when they're overlooked, disrespected, or used. Because what they call kindness is actually compliance. There's a pattern you've probably lived through without noticing it clearly. Someone reaches out, not because they value you, but because they need something. And you already know it. You feel it in the tone, in the timing, in the way they only appear when it benefits them. But you still say yes, you help. You give your time, your attention, your energy, hoping that this time it builds respect. It doesn't. It builds expectation. And expectation is where your value starts to drop. I remember a situation where a man kept being the reliable one in his circle. Always helping, always available, always the first to show up when someone needed something. But when he needed support, silence, excuses, delays. And instead of pulling back, he doubled down, gave more, tried harder, convinced himself that consistency would earn loyalty. It didn't. It exposed him. Because when your kindness is predictable, it becomes exploitable. People start to learn your pattern. They know exactly what to say, how to approach you, what tone to use. I knew I could count on you. You're the only one who understands. You're different from everyone else. It sounds like appreciation, but it's leverage. And if you're not aware of it, you'll respond the same way every time. That's not kindness, that's conditioning. The man who understands power treats kindness differently. He doesn't remove it. He controls it. He decides when it's given, to whom and why. Not emotionally, not impulsively, intentionally. Because kindness, when it's selective, creates tension. And tension creates respect. Think about it. The moment people realize your help isn't guaranteed, your approval isn't automatic, your presence isn't freely given, their behavior changes. They start paying attention. They start calibrating. Because now there's something at stake. There was a clear example of this with two men approached for the same favor. One said yes instantly, no questions, no hesitation. The other paused, looked at the situation, measured the person, then decided. One became the default option. The other became the respected one. Not because he was colder, but because he was controlled. And here's the part most men struggle to accept. Saying no is not rejection. It's positioning. When you say no without over-explaining, without guilt, without trying to soften it, you send a message. My time is not open access. My energy is not free, and people feel that. Even if they don't like it, they adjust to it. Calculated kindness isn't about being manipulative. It's about being precise. You give fully, but only where it's deserved. You show up strong, but only where there's reciprocity. And when you do give, it hits harder because it's not constant, not predictable, not guaranteed. That's what creates loyalty. Because people don't value what's always available, they value what they had to earn. So your behavior shifts. You stop saying yes out of habit. You stop helping just to be seen as good. You stop apologizing for protecting your time. Instead, you observe, you evaluate, and then you decide. And over time, something changes. The ones who respect you rise closer. The ones who don't fall away. No confrontation. No explanation. Just selection. Because a man who gives kindness without control becomes a resource. But a man who gives it with intention becomes someone people don't want to lose. There's a line most men cross without even noticing. The moment they start being kind, just to avoid being disliked. It feels harmless, almost noble, like you're choosing peace over conflict. But if you strip it down, what's really underneath is fear. Fear of rejection, fear of tension, fear of standing alone. And once fear enters your decisions, your behavior stops being yours. That's where power leaks. Because kindness driven by fear isn't kindness. It's submission dressed up to look respectable. It's you negotiating your value in real time, hoping people will treat you better if you make yourself easier to deal with. But the opposite happens. The more you try to be liked, the less you're respected. And deep down, you feel it, that quiet frustration when you realize people enjoy your presence, but don't take you seriously. That's the trade most men make without admitting it. And this is where everything shifts. Not in one dramatic moment, but gradually through small decisions. You stop explaining things that don't need explanation. You stop reacting to every slight. You stop making yourself constantly available. You stop giving access to people who haven't earned it. And at first, it feels uncomfortable, almost wrong, like you're becoming colder, more distant. But what you're actually becoming is controlled. There was a point where a man realized something simple but brutal. Every time he tried to keep the peace, he lost a little bit of himself. Every time he said yes when he meant no, every time he explained himself to be understood, every time he absorbed what wasn't his, he felt it. Not immediately, but later. That quiet resentment, that sense of being overlooked in his own life. So he changed. Not outwardly dramatic, no big announcement, just internally. He started choosing himself in small moments, and those small moments stacked. And something interesting happened. People started treating him differently, not because he demanded it, not because he raised his voice or asserted dominance, but because his behavior forced them to adjust. He became harder to read, harder to access, harder to move, and that created something most men chase but rarely build: respect. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind you feel in how people speak to you, how they hesitate before crossing a line, how they measure their words just a little more carefully. And this is where most people get it wrong. They hear this and think it's manipulation, that it's about controlling others, playing games, becoming cold. But that's a shallow interpretation. The real shift isn't about controlling people, it's about removing their ability to control you. Because the world will take what you don't protect. Your time, your attention, your energy, your patience. It will take it piece by piece, often without resistance, and it won't reward you for it. It will just expect more. So you stop offering yourself without structure. You stop giving without intention. You stop confusing intelligence with effectiveness. Because intelligence alone means nothing in the real world. You can see everything clearly, understand people deeply, think faster, analyze better, and still be overlooked, still be bypassed, still be used. Because none of that matters if you don't know how to position yourself. And that's what these shifts really are. Positioning. Not loud, not aggressive, not performative, but precise, controlled, intentional. You become the man who doesn't need to explain himself to be understood, the man who doesn't react to be respected, the man who doesn't chase validation because he already operates from a place of self-defined value. And that kind of presence doesn't need to announce itself. It's felt. Because in the end, intelligence is common. You've met intelligent men who are ignored, dismissed, even disrespected. But influence is rare. And it belongs to the man who understands one thing most never fully grasp. It's not about knowing more. It's about moving differently. And once you do, the game doesn't change. You do.